black entertainment outlets, heavy with a lot of black social life. And he started that paper in order to carry the advertising and the stories about the different entertainers that were performing on U Street. I came along in 1984 as editor and co-owner of the paper, and after my entrance, we changed the focus of the paper a little bit to start covering black news, to start covering a lot of the stories that were being missed pertaining to the black community. And we've been pretty successful with that for the 7 years that I've been there.
I dare say that you have been most successful because when I look forward each week to seeing what is Barry going to cover this week in the Capital Spotlight, because you cover stories that the major media, if you will, corporate media, and I won't call the names of it because it's not necessary, but you cover stories that they don't cover that are most pertinent to the black community.
Right. We're at a disadvantage when we try to do the same thing that, say, the Washington Post would do or the Washington Times would do. We can't win that game. So what we did when we started to report the news, rather than do what they were doing, we decided to create our own game. We don't make up the news, but we make news as far as it's never been covered before. There's so much news pertaining to the black community that's just ignored in the major media, so it gave us a wide field of information that we could present. Examples are, most recently we broke the story about a potential AIDS cure in Kenya called Kemron, that worldwide has saved thousands of people who have the AIDS disease, but in America you didn't hear anything about it.
Not at
Western media was almost to the point of covering it up. We don't know why they didn't want to report it, but we did. And since we did, other black newspapers have come along, and radio stations have come along.
Final Call picked it up.
The Final Call actually sent one of their top-ranking officials to Kenya to investigate the claims and came back with very encouraging findings. So the word is getting out more than it would have gotten out, but still far too many people don't know about Kemron, and that's something that we're going to have to work on.
And I understand that the drug, from what I read in the Final Call, has been 97% successful as treatment.
Yes, it has. It's a drug that's developed in Kenya by Dr. David Koech. And what it is it's really something that's produced in your body. It's called interferon. And interferons were already being used in the treatment of AIDS, but the dosage was too high, and the way they were administering the drug was wrong, and it became toxic, and it was side effects, and people were getting sicker. But what Dr. Koech did was he theorized that AIDS in people was like leukemia in cats. He then contacted a veterinarian who asked, how do you treat leukemia in cats? Which the veterinarian told him. He then adopted that treatment to people through the use of interferon, which is administered under the tongue, and as you say, it's a 97% success rate. And right now there are efforts going on through a group in Washington called the Kemron Action Coalition to bring Kemron to America. There are talks about a study of Kemron being begun at Howard University under the auspices of Dr. Wayne Greaves, who's the chief of infectious diseases there. So there's a lot of activity going on about Kemron that's still being ignored in the major media.
And there's another, I understand there's an even newer drug now that comes out of Kenya also, Immunex.
Right.
Is the other one.
Immunex is a drug that's developed along the same lines as Kemron, but because they had Kemron, they wanted to improve on it. So Immunex is the drug that they come up with now, and some people are even calling Immunex a cure for AIDS. Kemron has never really been called a cure, it's called a treatment. What Kemron does is it relieves all the symptoms of AIDS, the opportunistic infections, the weight loss, the appetite loss, all that disappear with Kemron, but for most people your blood stays HIV positive. With Immunex, they say that's actually changing people's blood from HIV positive to HIV negative.
So they become asymptomatic?
Yeah. So, but
Most
again, you don't hear anything about it. So that's why papers like Capital Spotlight and the Washington Afro-American, DC's Black-owned media, radio stations like WOL and WPFW
Yeah, Kathy Hughes.
are important to have.
Yes, because they disseminate so much information to the black community. If you hadn't broke that story, and let me commend you at this time for breaking that story, because it was shattering. I mean, we hadn't heard anything about this.
Yeah,
At all.
see, the reason why Capital Spotlight was able to come out with the story is because of people like you, like Tony Broder, like Naeem Akbar, who have taught us our history.
Yeah.
We know how our history has been altered throughout the years, how things have been distorted, lies have been told, so that when I saw information about Qumran, I said, boy, this is happening again. They're trying to cover this up. They're trying to distort this story. So we got right on it, and we started reporting it, and we broke every rule in journalism that there was in order to get Qumran out, but we did.
You know, the Honorable Dr. Francis Cress Welsing has mentioned that also, told us that we ought to look into that and pay attention, close attention to that. And FCC said that I've been, you know, really just following the reports and things concerning AIDS, because, you know, well, we won't get into, you know, the theories about how it started, but I believe that there's more to it than meets the eye.
Right. And Qumran is just one example of the role that a powerful black media can play in the black community. There are other stories that we've broken too. There are other reactions that we've taken to stories, say like these stories coming out of Japan about the caricatures, which which triggered us to start a nationwide boycott against Japanese products, or to try to start one anyway. We were unsuccessful in that, but I think we did get some attention to our concern. And
you brought attention to the community by mentioning it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And we started a petition campaign calling for our readers, 50,000 readers nationwide is what we asked for, to sign a petition saying they would buy no more Japanese products. There are other examples I'm trying to think of.
Terrence Johnson.
Yeah, the Terrence Johnson
signature.
We have another petition drive there in order to win the release of Terrence Johnson from prison. We started that about a month ago, and right now we're at the brink of 50,000. I'm thinking about upping that to 100,000 because we got to 50,000 so quick. There are plans for a rally in Maryland, which at that time we will present the petitions to Maryland Governor Schaefer. And there'll be, you really haven't seen anything yet from the Capital Spotlight. We're really just getting started.
But I do know that you have been on the forefront of so many things. Where does that spirit come from? I mean, that makes you want to be different and be there to make a difference, if you will?
Well, it's me in that I'm from a different world than most media you read. My job is not to just echo what you read in the Washington Post, or to try to imitate or duplicate what white-owned media outlets do. My job is to come up with a media that relates to my community and to my people, and so that's why it's different. I don't have any of the values. I don't have any of the principles of major media. Our media is based on truth and principle. I think most of the major media is built on lies and keeping the status quo, keeping a certain group of people down while maintaining those that have, maintaining them in the status quo. So that's why it comes out different.
Like Public Enemy say, don't believe the hype.
Right.
Because a lot of time what we hear in mass media, some of it just hype. All too often, too much of it is just hype. So we need a paper that's more in tune, that has their fingers, if you will, on the pulse of the community.
Right.
And deal with the issues of the grassroots people. Sometimes the mass media, all too often, I mean, they just overlook, like, well, them folk, they ain't really important. You know, we're not going to cover that because it's not important to the mass numbers of people.
You would be shocked at the number of stories that have a big impact on the black community that just go uncovered in the major media. One of the things I do every week in preparation for putting out our newspaper, I read 250 different black newspapers every week. And I don't read them word for word. I go through them looking for major stories or looking for stories that haven't been covered. And I mean, our paper's not big enough to put all the news in it that could go in it.
That you find when you're looking.
What we try to do is pull out the most entertaining, the most important, the most pertinent stories and publish those stories. But I mean, there are hundreds of untold stories that if members of the black community just knew about them, it would cause, you know, great
it's not because, I don't think it's because the major media don't know about some of these stories, but they choose not to focus on them.
Yeah,
is that the case?
Right. It's really no such thing. One of the things you learn in journalism school is to be an objective reporter. But what I found out is that there is no such thing as being an objective reporter. News that you read in the Washington Post or you see on Channel 9 or CBS, it's all told according to an
Somebody's
agenda.
perspective.
Yeah. They have an agenda. They really do. And that in order to maintain that agenda and stick to that agenda, they cover certain stories. Some stories don't get covered. Some stories get covered more than they should. And some things are just covered up.
Yeah, well, some things are media overkill, if you will.
Yeah,
for instance, if I could just mention the Berry situation with the Mayor Berry. To me, it was just overkill, really, the whole situation. The media just played it up too much.
And then if you take into consideration the Mayor Berry coverage, and then compare that to the Chuck Robb coverage.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they have let Chuck Robb slide out of this thing and put it on Doug Wilder. Some kind of way Doug Wilder got dirty.
He's the villain.
And, I mean, I thought if we were going to follow the same rules and guidelines that we did with Mayor Berry on Chuck Robb, then we need to get into more about these allegations about him using cocaine at this party. Because once they had allegations about Mayor Berry using cocaine, they stuck with that and they followed through, and then they finally set up an illegal sting to arrest him. So, I mean, at least let's stick to the same ball game, the same rules with Chuck Robb. Maybe we have a legal sting coming up to get him. But let's not try to cover it up and then throw somebody else into the fray and try to distract what the real focus should be.
Double standard.
It's a double standard.
Most definitely. This is Color Me Poetry, and we're here with Barry Murray. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back. I'm Danny Quinn. Welcome back to Color Me Poetry. We're here with Barry Murray, the Capital Spotlight News. Barry, why is it important? Some people would say, why is it important that we need black newspapers? You know, it may seem simplistic, but there are people who would say that.
Yeah. When I first came to the Capital Spotlight, that's something that everybody was saying to me. Why do we need black newspapers? We can get our news from the Washington Post, or we can get our news from Channel 9. We don't need black media. But I think what we've done since 1984 is shown why we do need black media.
All the more.
Because when you pick up a Spotlight, you won't see the stories covered in the Spotlight that you see covered in the Washington Post.
And that's what I like about it.
Right, and that's why you need, and if you don't have black newspaper, you won't know these things. So then if you're saying you don't need to know these things, then something else is wrong. It's not about media, it's about that somebody's brainwashed or somebody is just not really thinking that information is being withheld from them, and for what purposes.
And another thing, if you see the same story, it ain't gonna be from the same perspective.
Yeah, that's another thing that black media is charged with. That is coming up with a different perspective on the news. But I also think that's a trap.
How so?
It holds back a lot of black media, because if you have a black media outlet and then you think your responsibility is give a different perspective on the news, then what you're done, you're confining yourself to only the black news that's covered in the white media. What you're doing is reacting to all the stories about the black community that are covered in the white media. So that's why I don't like to think of myself as giving a different perspective on black news that was presented in the white media. My job, I think, is to tune out the major media, and just come out with the news as it develops in the black community.
So you would just could we say your stance would be better proactive than reactive?
Yeah,
'Cause
my position is proactive in the news. I don't read the Washington Post. I don't read the Washington Times. People come up to me and tell me things that they saw in the Washington Post, and I know nothing about it. But I think I can still keep a pulse beat on our community just by talking, going out in the street, talking to people, reading those black newspapers every week, and listening to talk shows and, you know, television. But
Well, I agree with you because I don't think you can get a better perspective of the black community by listening to or reading the Washington Post.
No.
And no, because they ain't got it themselves. That's why.
And I don't want to waste my time and energy trying to put out all the fires that they start. My job is to just report the news as it relates to the black community and not let the Washington Post lead me around the world. When they tell one lie here, then I got to go straighten out that lie. Then they tell another lie over here, I got to go straighten out that. I just tune them out. I tune them out and come up with our own thing.
And I think that's the best way to do because it's too much time, it's too much energy, you know, trying to react to what somebody else is doing. I say be proactive, not only just in that area, but anything that we need to do in the black community. Spend too much time being reactionary, I think.
But therein lies why you say it's different, or why you say that you see things that you wouldn't see anyplace else. It's because basically the Post is tuned out. The Times is tuned out. Very rarely will you see the same thing on our front page that you see on their front page. If you do, it's a coincidence.
Let's take, for instance, the New York Post coverage of Dr. Leonard Jeffries and that whole thing. I mean, the way they just you know, blew it all out of proportion.
Yeah.
You know?
And now that's an area. I'm glad you raised that point because that's an area where we came up short. Because we really didn't get on Dr. Jeffries. We had done some things on Dr. Jeffries, but we really didn't get on Dr. Jeffries until the New York Post did what they were supposed to do. So in a way, what we did with him was we reacted to them. Had we been more proactive regarding Dr. Jeffries and what he was saying, that when the Post came out with their story, we could have just ignored it. But we had to react to that, so that was an area where we came up weak because we did react to them.
Yeah, you did do a story
yeah, we reacted.
where it was a Jewish colleague of his.
Yeah, a Jewish colleague came out in defense of Dr. Jeffries, saying that the things that he mentioned in his speech were known to be true. They had been said before, and he didn't understand why there was such a big hullabaloo going on now.
Well, Dr. Jeffries said no more than what Malcolm said. He said no more than what Minister Farrakhan is saying. They say the same thing. It's nothing new.
Right.
So why are they making a big deal out of it at this time?
Well, Dr. Jeffries says it was because he had won another battle with the New York City public school curriculum and getting Afrocentric studies incorporated into it. And he says he had won a battle with the New York Post and having that done, and he feels like they were trying to retaliate for that by attacking him on his speech. So maybe that accounts for why it was such a big, you know,
big hoop to do.
uproar over what he said.
I want to also talk about integration because concerning integration, because I think that integration has not been, we've gone backwards in many ways, and not just in the publishing area, but in many different ways. In business, in terms of education, our kids aren't being educated. Our kids are being educated by somebody else, and they're not really being educated. I just call it part of the miseducation. Before you can get to education, you got to get rid of the miseducation, as Dr. Carter G. Woodson said.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think what people in the black community and across America, black and white, are going to have to understand is that integration did not work. Integration is
backfired.
dead. Yeah, it is dead. It did not work. You can't point to a handful of black people with big jobs and say that integration worked when the mass of black people are doing bad.
Worse.
In America, black people come out last on the totem pole in every standard of measurement: economic, social, health.
Sure.
We are doing worse than everybody else trying to integrate into white America. It did not work. We need to give up on it. We need to try something new.
I agree with you, and I couldn't agree with you more.
But see, the problem is coming in is that a lot of our old line civil rights leaders don't want to give integration up. They're still trying to integrate into white America, i.e. the NAACP, the Urban League, a lot of our congressional leaders.
But see, when you talk that way, there are people who are going to say, well, you're a separatist, you know, like they say, oh, I'm a separatist, or I'm a black nationalist, like they say about Minister Farrakhan. But there's nothing wrong with doing for self.
Right. I think once we're able to separate ourselves and help ourselves do better, then that's the time when you talk about how we can come together
On an equal
to make
basis.
one great America.
I think Dr. King
Yeah.
meant on an equal basis. You know, it always amazed me that they always talk about the Dr. King in 1964, talking about the dream. They come with all this stuff. I get sick of hearing it, real, I'll be honest with you. The way living the dream. What dream? Look at the condition of black people. We've been dreaming too long. That's the damn
Dreaming
problem.
is for those who are asleep.
Right.
And we don't need to be dreaming.
We need a
to
wake-up
be
call.
Yeah, we need to get busy and try to help
right.
ourselves
But
out.
see, Barry, they don't talk about the Dr. King in 1968 when they killed him, that spoke out against the war in Vietnam, that spoke out against the atrocities in South Africa, and all those other things that he spoke out against. They said, no, you stick to civil rights in the United States. That's not your area.
I'm glad, that's another good point you brought up, because that brings in the media. White media, major media, defined what the civil rights movement was for black people in the 50s and 60s. They left out the economic development part of it, which was very much a part of Dr. Martin Luther King's civil rights dream. It was economic development in the black community. But when the white media reported it, they didn't report that aspect of it. All we thought was that we were fighting to be able to go to white restaurants and then let all the black restaurants go out of business, go to white hotels and let all the black hotels go out of business, and that's not what he meant. He was trying to establish the constitutional right for black people to go to these places, because he felt that we couldn't do anything in America, we couldn't exist in America unless we could prove that the Constitution worked for us too. He wasn't trying to say, now that you had a right to go to a white restaurant or a white hotel,
You don't need a black one.
don't go to the black ones, because
No,
that just brought us more problems than we had.
I don't
We
think
were
he was
doing
saying
better than before integration.
Yeah.
Once we learn that, once we are not afraid to be called separatists or nationalists, and once we learn that we have to support our own institutions and help our own selves out of the troubles we have, then we'll be able to better integrate with.
So we had to do it.
We have to do
But
it.
see, like I just said, some of us thought that, well, if our children could sit in a classroom next to white children, then through osmosis, they're supposed to be smarter. That kind of thing. Just
Well-
sitting in the class next to a white child don't make my child smarter.
Well,
My child has to know who he is from the inside out.
we've done that, and it's not helping us.
It's not working.
It's not working.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem.
And that's not to knock the people who tried to make it work.
Yeah, well, it's not to take away from Dr. King
Right,
and the
or
great things that he
Thurgood
did.
Marshall, any of the
Right.
other pioneer civil rights leaders. They were very important to our struggle, and they're very valuable to us, but it didn't work. And now we need to, and because of them, we know it won't work, and now we need to try something else.
I was a child at the time. Of course, I was a child of the 60s, but I was more in tune to the things that Malcolm was saying. Even as a child, I had a great respect for Malcolm. I had a great respect for the man who taught Malcolm, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Had a great respect for him, and still have a great respect for the teachings, because they were talking about self-help.
Right.
They weren't talking about give me this and give me that.
And a good sign that I see is that a lot of our youth are beginning to pay attention to what Malcolm said. Because to me, Malcolm's message was more in tune to what we need to really try now. Because as we've said before, the other way don't work. Malcolm's message is another way that teaches self-reliance and teaches us to look to ourselves for what we need instead of looking to other people. And I think that's the way we should go in the 90s and into the next century.
I think this will be I think the 90s will be the decade of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
More entrepreneurship. We get back to, you know, to business, to the business of doing for ourselves.
With an assist from the black media.
Yes.
Because see, black media will be able to tell the story of the black entrepreneur. It'll be able to offer him advertising rates so that he can get his message out to his potential customers on what he has to sell, where he is, and how much it costs. And we can give him advertising rates more affordable to him. Inch advertising in Capital Spotlight costs approximately $10 an inch, as opposed to the Washington Post, which is over $100 an inch. So that's a barrier for a black businessman right there. He can't get over.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that. Well, since you mentioned about the subscriptions to the Capital Spotlight, how can we get in touch with you if I want to get a subscription to the Spotlight?
If you would like to subscribe to the Capital Spotlight and read news about the black community that you won't find anywhere else, you can call area code 202-628-0700.
Barry, it's been great having you here on Color Me Poetry, and we're going to have you back, and we're going to support the Spotlight each and every day. I look forward to seeing it each and every week, you know, when it comes out. I'm wondering what you're going to cover. So it's been great having you here. We're going to have you back, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
This is Danny Queen. This is Color Me Poetry, and until next time, Color Me Poetry.